Howdy, hey there, and welcome to the Cover-Up Iceberg. This is largely about government cover-ups, but there's some other cover-ups from organizations and religions in there. This iceberg was initially made by Reddit user The Circus, S-I-R-K-U-S. Their account was suspended when I clicked in to say anything to them, so hopefully if they see this, great job, because I liked it. This was fun to make. I'd never made anything like this. It was a lot of fun making it. The recording of it was pretty fun as well. All of it was fun. I enjoyed it. So if you enjoy it, please also, like, subscribe, all that junk. I'm a small YouTube channel. Help me out. As for the content, well, I did my best. There was only a few things, like 3 or 4, that I couldn't really find anything on. There were a few things that were very broad, and there were a few things that repeated. When it comes to the repeating ones, I just didn't cover them again once they were repeated. But anyways, without further ado, let's dive into Layer 1 of the cover-up iceberg. Clear skies, well known. Layer 1. MLK. Starting off with a really good one, this refers to the strange behavior of intel agencies and the assassination of MLK. Prior to his assassination, the FBI anonymously sent letters to MLK suggesting that he did self-exit game or destroy his own businesses. And they also mailed fake sex tapes to his wife in an attempt to destroy his marriage. An eyewitness pointed out where he saw the shooter to the police during the assassination. The next day, the Memphis police destroyed the area that was pointed out of the alleged shooter. And finally, the fact that MLK had police escorts with him throughout the entirety of his time in Memphis, but about an hour before the shooting, his escorts were recalled back to police HQ with no explanation. Area 51. This one's an all-time classic. This refers to the secret military base, I say secret in quotes there because everyone knows about it, in Nevada, that is allegedly the home of aliens, whether that be alien beings or alien crafts, kind of up to whatever mythology you want to listen to. The story goes from actual alien beings to crash retrieval alien technology, but Area 51 can best be summed up by one word. Aliens. Chernobyl. The Chernobyl meltdown refers to the meltdown of a nuclear reactor in Soviet Russia, what is in now Ukraine, during 1986. The Soviet government, in an attempt to keep it secret, did not allow much reporting on the incident. Seeing that the Soviet Union controlled the media that came out of the country, it would be Sweden who would break the news to the world. Figuring out there had been some sort of nuclear problem in Russia based off of a correlation of radiation levels in wind directions coming from the area. This would force the Soviets to admit the truth about the meltdown to the world. Fukushima. Following in line as a spiritual successor, this refers to the Fukushima accident that occurred in 2011. The company running the nuclear power plant, Tokyo Electric Power Co., failed to report the failing of 3 reactors in the facility, causing a delayed response in addressing them. Instead of using the word meltdown, the company intentionally used less severe language, calling it a core failure instead of a meltdown. If the proper verbiage had been used, the issue may have been addressed properly, avoiding the disaster. Galileo affair. This was a pivotal point in science and refers to the Catholic Church's trial of Galileo, the famous astronomer. They were concerned with the potential impacts his findings would have on theology and actively suppressed them. Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a covert operation authorized by President John F. Kennedy to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government in Cuba. On April 17, 1961, a group of approximately 1,500 Cuban exiles, known as Brigade 2506, landed at the Bay of Pigs on Cuba's southern coast. The invasion was financed and directed by the Central Intelligence Agency, a reoccurring character throughout this entire iceberg. UFO footage. This is extremely broad, and there's a lot of UFO footage. But as a whole, the government doesn't like when there's good footage, and in the UFO community, a lot of footage will just get outright wiped, and we're kind of stuck with crap like the Tic Tac footage and whatnot. Again, aliens. The Great Smog. From December 5th to December 9th, 1952, a lethal smog cloud would descend upon London. It was a result of extreme industrial waste and pressure weather conditions which trapped the smog close to the ground. It would indirectly cause the premature deaths of nearly 4,000 people. Rendlesham Forest. In the December of 1980, the U.S. Air Force would report seeing a UFO in strange lights in the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. The following day, a large group of eyewitnesses reported seeing the craft land. An investigation found abnormally high levels of radiation throughout the forest, and the location of the alleged landing has become a classified area. COINTELPRO. Between 1956 and 1971, the FBI conducted a series of illegal operations to infiltrate and subvert political groups deemed quote-unquote subversive to American values. Some of these included the Black Panthers, the Socialist Party, Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, and Southern Christian Leadership Committee. The Manhattan Project. This refers to the top-secret project during the end of the Second World War in which the U.S. government's top minds created a superweapon that we now know today as the nuclear bomb, MK-Ultra. MK-Ultra was a government program formerly known as Project Artichoke that had the stated goal to create a form of effective mind control. Most famously, the program used experimental substances to alter the state of the user's consciousness. In particular, acid. The program would most likely have never been exposed to the public if it wasn't for the 1975 Church Committee that aimed to delve into and expose the Central Intelligence Agency's abuse of power and overstepping. Clinton emails. During her time in the State Department, Hillary Clinton illegally used a private server for official government materials. After an investigation into the controversy, the FBI deemed that there was no classified material sent through the servers. However, several other government agencies claimed that hundreds, if not thousands, of the emails in the server should have been labeled as classified and were retroactively deemed so. The Tuskegee Study. Between 1932 and 1972, the Center for Disease Control and Public Health Services would experiment on 400 African American men. The subjects unknowingly were injected with syphilis as a means to experiment for a new treatment. As a result, hundreds of the test subjects would die. Roswell. In 1947, an alleged UFO crashed in the remote town of Roswell, New Mexico. According to many locals, they saw the craft crash land in the desert. Reports go as far to claim that someone even saw the living bodies of extraterrestrials being extracted from the scene. The government has persisted that this was a weather balloon that crashed, but that doesn't explain the strong military presence that was there upon its retrieval. Waco Standoff. In 1993, federal law enforcement would confront the Branch Davidians cult and their leader at their compound in Waco, Texas. The Davidians would refuse to exit their compound, ignoring the government orders, and decided to barricade the women and children inside and the men to go fight against the siege. The compound had been surrounded by tanks, armored vehicles, and over 600 federal law enforcement officers. The standoff would end with the ATF and FBI burning down the compound, with the members still inside. It would be revealed that many of the Branch Davidians were killed by fatal gunshots, to which the federal law enforcement agents denied doing. But of the 9 survivors from the siege, some have claimed that the gunshots were in fact from the law enforcement and were being covered up. Pentagon Papers. Originally written by Daniel Ellsberg, these papers revealed to the U.S. public for the first time the true scope of military actions in Vietnam that had not been made public. These included coastal raids in northern Vietnam and secret attacks ordered by the Marine Corps. Ellsberg was originally tried with conspiracy, theft of government property, and espionage, but these charges were dropped by the prosecutors as they discovered a smear campaign ordered on Ellsberg by the Nixon administration. Dyatlov Pass. In 1959, a group of 9 Soviet hikers would be mysteriously killed in the Ural Mountains. It was deemed that they were killed by a quote-unquote overwhelming force, which some have called a natural disaster, but others have claimed it was a Yeti. The Enigma Machine. The Enigma Machine was a German cipher tool used by the Germans in World War II. The British would decode it, but not reveal much information into how they did that, covering up their extensive program, fearing that others would then use their deciphering tools against themselves. Layer 2. Murky Waters, lesser known. The BCCI scandal. Throughout the 1980s, there was a massive financial crisis and collapse that had basically been the fault of a bank called BCCI, but it was on an international level. The BCCI had been laundering money internationally in one way or another. They were selling arms to terrorist groups and financing crime rings. The bank would try to cover up all of its illegal activity, but would fail, causing the bank to collapse and $10 billion in assets lost. The RMS Lusitania. The RMS was a British civilian transport boat that was sunk by German U-boats in 1915, forcing the U.S. to join the efforts of World War I and change the tide of the conflict. Many speculate that the British orchestrated the attack, knowing that there would be U-boats off the coast, but still giving the okay to sail intentionally to drag the U.S. into the war that they were losing. Yugoslav War. The Yugoslav War was a civil war in the former country of Yugoslavia. Much of the coverage of the war in the West was censored and had a skewed bias against the Serbs, claiming to be the instigator of the conflict whilst hiding important truths about the Croats and Bosniaks on the other side. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. This was a scheduled commercial flight that completely disappeared off the face of the earth, black box included. Many have speculated that the flight was somehow taken by aliens, citing a leaked video of 3 orbs flying in a spiral around the plane before disappearing. The video was scrubbed and is difficult to find, but the location of Flight 370 still remains a mystery to this day. The Iranian election. In 2009, the results of the Iranian election deemed the dictatorial leadership to still be in power, though the elections were widely disputed. There were so many disputes that the nationwide protests erupted because of the alleged fraudulent charges that were covered up by the dictatorial party. Mass graves. Again, this is a very broad one. There's mass graves everywhere in most countries, and the governments usually just build over them and they go unmarked. Gonna keep it short, but that's it. Kursk sub. In 2000, a Russian nuclear-powered sub would sink to the bottom of the ocean, killing its entire crew inside. The Russian government tried to suppress the story because they had called the sub unsinkable, but clearly it wasn't. The Voynich manuscript. This refers to the strange manuscript acquired by Wilfrid Voynich in 1912. The manuscript is 240 pages of an unknown language with detailed drawings and diagrams of non-existent plant life. The origin of the manuscript is unknown and has yet to be translated into any language, leaving the contents a mystery to this day. Philadelphia experiment. During World War II in 1943, the Navy was experimenting with different new forms of cloaking technology. During one of these tests, the USS Eldridge, a naval destroyer, disappeared in Philadelphia and reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia. Some have speculated that it was teleported, while others claim of some sort of invisibility device. The government denies the incident ever happens, which has left some to believe that they are covering up the invention of a secret tech. USS Indianapolis. In the July of 1945, the USS Indianapolis was attacked by Japanese forces, resulting in the death of all 880 crew members on board. Allegedly, the Navy had heard the distress calls for assistance, choosing to ignore them as they did not want to deploy the resources for an unimportant boat and left the vessel and its crew to die. To further the brutality, the ship sank in shark-infested waters, and many claim that if any survivors were found, they were brutally mutilated by those sharks. The Balibu Five. In 1975, 5 Australian reporters would go to East Timor to cover the Indonesian invasion. They were reportedly killed in the crossfire of the battle, but it was later revealed that the Australian government knew they had been executed by Indonesian forces within hours of arriving, choosing to cover up the incident to not involve Australia in the conflict. The Downing Street Memo. The Downing Street Memo was a leaked document from July of 2002 that outlined the build-up to the invasion of Iraq and mentioned at the time classified U.S. military details. The memo notably stated that the invasion would be in the name of stopping terrorism and the threat of WMDs, both of which the intelligence communities would work to quote-unquote fix the lack of evidence of. This one is really messed up. Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto was a car manufactured between 1970 and 1980 with a most unfortunate design flaw. If it was rear-ended, it would cause the doors to lock up and the engine to explode, resulting with those trapped inside to have a slow, painful, unavoidable death. Over 500 reported deaths from the Ford Pinto occurred, resulting in massive lawsuits. Later on, an internal memo was leaked showing that Ford knew that this would happen. But they ran a cost analysis of the whole situation, and their leadership basically said, look, it's cheaper if we just pay the families with out-of-court settlements than recall the cars. So just let them burn. Nice, Ford. And finally, Ruby Ridge. Ruby Ridge is yet another great story about the government. They had been illegally wiretapping and spying on the Weaver family in 1992. The family was heavily armed, and after agents in camouflage shot the Weaver's dog, a standoff occurred, resulting in a multiple-day standoff and the deaths of mother and wife Vicky Weaver and 14-year-old son Samuel Weaver. Layer 3, Losing Light, Secret Operations. Pretty much everything in this layer are just CIA operations. Some of them were made public. Some of them were made public through different means of government investigation, but these are the entire layer is operations. Some of them are from the CIA, but this one's it's all pretty straightforward. And a lot of them weren't really cover-ups since they were covert in the first place. So take it as you will. So let's start. Operation Ranch Hand. The military operation that took place throughout the Vietnam conflict to use chemicals to defoliate, aka kill all the plants, throughout the jungle using substances like Agent Orange, which has its own entry later on. Operation Paperclip. After World War II, the Americans decided that a lot of the upper brass of the former enemies, the Germans, would be useful. So they recruited many of the top German scientists and intelligence officers to come work for the US in secret. They got us to the moon. Project Chaos. From 1967 to 1974, the CIA conducted a domestic espionage project targeting anyone in the population they thought could be a foreign national of any sort, and it was pretty much an excuse to spy on anyone. Think of it as like an early Patriot Act. Operation Crossroads. In 1946, the US government would test 2 nuclear weapons at the Bikini Atoll, rendering the environment destroyed and unable to sustain life. But on the bright side, this also inspired the idea of Bikini Bottom, and that talking sponge is actually a byproduct of radiation. You know, not officially, but come on. Bikini Atoll, Bikini Bottom, just look at it. Operation High Jump. Operation High Jump refers to the largest military operation ever conducted in Antarctica in 1946, headed by Admiral Richard Burr. It was an alleged exercise into Arctic warfare, but many speculate that they went to find the German outpost left from World War II. In an alleged secret diary, Admiral Byrd claimed to have flown into the Hollow Earth, encountering UFOs. Upon his return, he was given the Medal of Honor and never made any public appearances ever again. Project Sunshine. Following the test of 1946, the U.S. Energy Department wanted to test how nuclear fallout would affect an ecosystem, so they tested exactly that on a bunch of plants and living animals. The project was kept a secret, and the results were quite gruesome. Operation 40, not the COD mission, but Operation 40 was a covert CIA group tasked with collecting info and data on South American leaders, in particular Castro. They had much to do with the orchestration of the Bay of Pigs and even planned to assassinate Castro himself. Operation Fishbowl. Oh man, we shot nukes into the sky. Why? To study high-altitude radiation and fallout. But okay then, that doesn't answer the next question. Why did we shoot 11 nukes? Okay, but that doesn't answer the next question. Why did we shoot 11 nukes into the sky? My answer is that they were shooting at aliens, but the stated answer is to, study fallout from altitude. Operation Midnight Climax. This was a sub-operation of MK Ultra, to which the attendees of a high-end brothel unknowingly were dosed with acid to see how they reacted. The CIA does whatever the hell it feels like. I hope you guys understand that. It does whatever it wants, whenever it wants. Operation Midnight LAC. The U.S. Army were interested in seeing how a U.S. city would react to a bioweapon test. So they went ahead and dropped over. The U.S. Army was interested in seeing how a U.S. city, like San Francisco, would react to a bioweapon test. So they went ahead and dropped the bacterias over 1,000 square miles in a radius around San Francisco without the knowledge of the city inhabitants. Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation from the U.S. Department of Defense, in which the government would attack its own military bases and civilians, then proceed to blame Cuba in order to start a war against the island nation. The operation was rejected by then President John F. Kennedy. Operation Glowing Symphony. In 2016, the U.S. Cyber Commission launched an attack on the ISIS network, sending millions of phishing emails, gaining access to the network, mapping it, collecting all of the data, then removing it, and then locking the users out of their own system. So be careful of those phishing emails, everybody. That's why your company makes you do that training. Operation Caution. I'm lost on this one. I don't know if it auto-corrected and meant to be something else, but I couldn't. It repeated right after Operation Paperclip, so I don't know. Maybe it glitched. I couldn't find anything about this one. I'm lost. It's my first L. Operation Gold. In the 1950s, the CIA and MI6 joined together in an attempt to tap the landlines of the Soviets in East Germany. They built a massive underground tunnel to the Soviet telephone lines, then proceeded to listen and record over 90,000 communications, collecting the data all the while. I like this one too. Operation Giant Lance. So towards the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S. was going kind of stupid. They had this whole gimmick called madman diplomacy, which was trying to build Nixon up as some bloodthirsty nuke user so our enemies would be too afraid to fight us. Operation Giant Lance was when we flew 18 bombers over the Arctic Circle. And oh yeah, they all had nukes on them. And this was an attempt to basically flex on the Russians to make them make Vietnam surrender. It didn't work. Operation Snow White. We're breaking away from the theme here, everybody. Not the CIA, not the government. Operation Snow White was the Church of Scientology. So prior to 1967, the Church of Scientology had been deemed a tax-exempt entity since they were a religious group. But since they made so much money, the IRS said, hey, I want some. The church didn't really like this, and the fact that they had to give the government information. So in 1970, the Church of Scientology launched this Operation Snow White, which was to infiltrate intel agencies around the world and reclaim quote-unquote church secrets. I'd like to make it clear that I love the Church of Scientology and I love everything they do, and I fully support them. Thank you, Elron. Nice. Operation Condor. This was a joint operation between the CIA and most of the intelligence organizations in South America to kill as many socialists and communists as they could in terror attacks. Okay. Operation Wet Back. This was an operation in the 1950s. I didn't make this name up. To deport as many Mexicans as they could find. Way to name it subtly, guys. Stargate Project. As much as I wish this was about Stargates in the Middle East, it's not. This refers to the now declassified top secret program run by the CIA's little brother, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. The focus of this program was research into the potential of psychic and remote viewers as a new form of spying. The program had roughly 20 members and was run out of an old rundown barracks. On a side note, the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats is based off of this, and I like that movie. So it's pretty funny and it feels like something the CIA would have done. Operation Ajax. This was a plot by the CIA and MI6 to overthrow the democratically elected leader of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. I'm not re-recording that. Operation Chatter. This is another precursor to MKUltra. The military wanted to find some sort of truth serum, so they experimented with different substances on people to try to get them to talk against their will, but without torturing them. So the morality was kind of there. It was like kind of there, but that quickly went out the window. Operation Praying Mantis. In 1988, the U.S. engaged in the largest naval battle since World War II with Iran after one of U.S. boats sank. It's pretty straightforward. Operation Wrath of God. Operation Wrath of God was a covert operation conducted by Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, in response to the 1972 Munich massacre. The operation aimed to assassinate individuals accused of being involved with the Black September, the Palestinian militant group responsible for the attack, but as well as high-ranking members of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. Operation Dark Winter. This refers to a series of simulated bioweapon attacks on the U.S. that were simulated at Edwards Air Force Base in 2001. The operation sought to test the response of public leaders as well as a military response and include the participation of many high-ranking officials. Operation Cyclone. This refers to the covert military funding of Afghan freedom fighters and its training of the Mujahideen fighters in order to fight a proxy war against the Soviet Union. This would go on to be a problem for us because many of these guys that we trained in the Mujahideen would end up being terrorists that we fought later on. So, big problem. Operation Able. This refers to the time the CIA trained Guatemalan revolutionaries to overthrow their then leader, President Arbenz. It didn't work. And that's the end of Tier 3. Layer 4, Dark Depths. Massacres. So this is much like Layer 3, where they have just a bunch of mass killings in a lair. So, trigger warning. Tiananmen Square. In 1989, the Chinese government would massacre anywhere from several hundred to several thousand protesting students in Tiananmen Square. To this day, it is still extremely censored, with any record of its occurrence being completely wiped within the borders of China, with many Chinese citizens born after the event completely unaware that it even happened. Dos Eres Massacre. During the Guatemalan Civil War, a rebel group out of the village of Dos Eres assaulted the army, killing 21 soldiers. The army retaliated by going into the village and killing over 350 civilians, making it one of the bloodiest events in Guatemalan history. Way to go, guys. The Bologna Massacre. This refers to an attack in the Bologna rail station in Italy in 1980 that took the lives of 85 people. As time has gone on, there's been a lot of issues brought to the attention of people. Many claim that two high-ranking members of the Italian police had knowledge of the bombing beforehand. Evidence of this is based off of a suitcase in a train filled with explosives that a local officer had placed, claiming he had orders to do so from high above his pay grade. There's also been a severe lack of prosecution that has angered the families of the victims, suggesting a government complacency to investigate beyond the narrative. Zong. In 1781, the slave ship known as Zong, containing over 400 slaves, was on course to Jamaica from Africa. The crew miscalculated the water rations they brought, so they opted to throw overboard 130 women and children into the middle of the ocean to correct themselves. My track. In 1947, during the First Indochina War, the French army would massacre the village of Maitrac, killing over 300 people in cold blood. Eureka Stockade Massacre. This one was a little bit less severe than the other ones, but in the 1850s in Australia, there was a brief conflict between the miners of the Victorian Gold Rush and the local authorities, resulting in the killing of 22 miners, 5 soldiers, and 113 miners being arrested. Bloody Sunday. Pretty straightforward. In 1972, a group of British soldiers opened fire on a crowd in Derry, Ireland, resulting in the death of 13 individuals and injuring 15 more. The British government tried to suppress reporting on them, as this was in the middle of the Irish conflict, the Troubles. El Mozote Massacre. In 1981, the El Salvadorian army was in search of the FMLN guerrillas, who they believed were in the jungles near the village of El Mozote. Over the course of the next 3 days, the army demanded the village, who didn't know anything about the conflict, to turn in the rebels. When the villagers couldn't do so, the army killed about 800 to 1,000 people. This one's really crazy. Rana Plaza. In 2013, an 8-story commercial building in Bangladesh would collapse, killing over 1,000 people. During investigation, it was revealed that the owner of the plaza, Sohail Rana, was aware of the structural failings and had been informed by his own staff and engineering teams that the building was going to collapse if nothing was done, but he ignored them. But it wasn't just Sohail. Owners of the factories inside of the building were also aware, and the local government seemed to have been aware because the local inspectors just said, it's fine. They probably got bribed. The Katyn Massacre. In 1940, Stalin ordered the killings of 22,000 Polish soldiers and officials by the Russian secret police. They carried out the killings in the Katyn forest and buried most of the bodies there as well. Nogan Ri. The Korean War in the village of Nogunri, South Korea, the U.S. would open fire and bomb a group of 400 civilians huddled together near a bridge. At first, the U.S. Army would deny the events and occurrences, but later they had to admit to the killings after eyewitness testimony came out against them. St. Bartholomew Massacre. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was a targeted group of assassinations and wave of Catholic mob violence directed against the Huguenots during the French Wars of Religion. It occurred in 1572 and lasted about 2 months, resulting in the deaths of 5,000 to 30,000 people. Pando Massacre. In 2009, a large group of protesting indigenous people in Bolivia were marching towards the city of Cobeja to protest the prefect's leadership. They were ambushed by troops who opened fire on them, resulting in 19 deaths and an international condemnation of the Bolivian government. Nanking Massacre. This was less of a single event and more of a brutal occupation leading up to and during World War II. The Japanese imperial forces would occupy much of China, in particular the city of Nanking. The Japanese soldiers committed massive human rights atrocities and almost ritualistic mass killings during the occupation. Public executions were common, and the imperial soldiers violated every human right you could imagine, with the death tolls being estimated anywhere near 300,000. Rwandan Massacre. Again, less of a massacre and more of an ethnic cleansing. During the Rwandan Civil War in 1994, the Tutsi people would be targeted for an ethnic cleansing. Over 4 months, roughly 800,000 Tutsi people would be killed by Hutu militias. The Armenian Genocide. During World War I in the Ottoman Empire, the people of Armenia would be systematically rounded up and their culture destroyed before systematic mass killings of the people took place at the hands of the Ottoman soldiers. Approximately 600,000 to 1.5 million people would be killed during this ethnic cleansing. Babi Yar Massacre. Babi Yar Massacre was an event that took place during World War II. It took place on September 29th to 30th in 1941 near Kiev, Ukraine, and resulted in the systematic execution of nearly 34,000 Jews by soldiers and local collaborators. My Lai Massacre. This was a war crime committed by the United States Army in 1968 during the Vietnam conflict. The Army entered a Vietnamese village thinking that they would find the Viet Cong combatants they had been looking for. They opened fire on the village, killing 504 civilians, many of which were women and children. Tlatelolco Massacre. I don't know if I said that right, but I tried. The massacre was a part of the Mexican Dirty War, a period of violent repression by the U.S.-backed Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI, government against political and social opposition. Roughly 500 would be killed and 1,000 injured, all of which were protesting university students from nearby institutions. Wounded Knee Massacre. In the December of 1890 in South Dakota, the Lakota people were gathering en masse as a part of the Ghost Dance movement. The U.S. Army, fearing the large gatherings, opened fire, killing 300 Lakota women, children, and men, resulting in the largest massacre in U.S. history. Sabra and Shatila Massacre. Over the course of 2 days in 1980, Palestinian refugees in Lebanon were killed en masse by Christian Lebanese militia with support from the IDF. The death toll was anywhere from 1,500 to 3,500 killed. And finally, we have a strange one here. The volleyball incident. The volleyball incident refers to an alleged mass shooting taking place at a high school volleyball game in 2006. The reason I say alleged is because there's no proof of the shooting ever occurring at a volleyball game in 2006. Yet, hundreds of people recall hearing it reported on the news shortly after its occurrence. Some claim it was in Utah, while others have claimed Montana, but to some, the incident was covered up with any trace of it being gone. Tier 5, Bathyal Zone, Forgotten. Rendition and Torture Program. Throughout the War on Terror, our pals at the CIA had a program called Extraordinary Rendition. The program allowed the CIA to kidnap anyone suspected of terrorism and, well, torture a confession out of them, whether it was real or not. The program was responsible for multiple human rights violations and has never been held accountable. This one's a little bit weird. Metcalf Sniper Attack. In 2013, a sniper attacked the PG&E Metcalf Power Substation but did not target any personnel. The sniper, using some sort of assault rifle, fired at important pieces of infrastructure within the substation, mainly transformers, causing $15 million in damage. The sniper was never caught, and there was no known suspects. Some have speculated that the sniper was attempting a terror attack or was a potential espionage agent sent to disrupt the power system. But they had inside help, as they knew the layout of the substation very clearly. The boys on the tracks. In 1987, 16-year-old boy Don Henry and 17-year-old boy Kevin Ives were allegedly hit by a train in Arkansas. The train conductor reported seeing the boys lying on the tracks. As the conductor engaged the brakes and blew the horn, the boys laid motionless. Upon a second autopsy, there was evidence of stab wounds, implying a murder. Many have speculated this was because the boys saw the CIA asset Barry Seal smuggling drugs into the nearby Polk Airport. In order to keep the operation a secret, the boys were killed and their bodies laid on the track to make it look as if they had exited their own lives on their own accord. State-sponsored terrorism. Again, this is less of a single event and it's more of a repeating concept. Do you remember what I mentioned about the Mujahideen and how we, kind of trained them? Well, a lot of those guys would end up to go on to be Taliban leaders, and they would pass those trainings down to ISIS. A lot of these terrorist groups and networks within the U.S. have been seen using U.S. assets, so it's an alleged cover-up that we perpetuate a war there in order to keep the military-industrial complex's money happy. But I don't think any of that's true, and this is just an alleged, and I'm just making an Iceberg video, so yeah. The Troubles cover-up. The Troubles were a 30-year period in Northern Ireland marked by long-form covert conflict between the Irish Republicans and the Loyalists/British. Throughout the process, 3,000 people would be killed, with many claiming there were human rights abuses from the British. The British intelligence community did their best to prevent any sort of internal information to be leaked and acted to cover up any abuses that occurred. Unit 731. Unit 731 was a secret Imperial Japanese research team focused on biological warfare that existed from 1936 to 1945. What set them apart was their massive human rights abuses, illegally testing hundreds of thousands of live Chinese civilians and POWs, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands over the course of their existence. Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a chemical agent widely used throughout the Vietnam conflict as a means to kill off the foliage in the jungle, thus exposing the enemy's hiding locations. Up until the 1980s, the government claimed there were no negative health effects associated with the substance. But it was revealed they were knowingly suppressing studies that they paid for that revealed a litany of lethal health concerns that resulted in contact with the chemical, including cancers and birth defects in children. Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh, otherwise known as the Oklahoma City Bomber, was a domestic terrorist arrested for his masterminding and execution of the Oklahoma City bombing, but many have suspected that there was a cover-up of other assailants. Many eyewitnesses have reported seeing McVeigh with other people on the day of the bombings, but no second accomplice was ever arrested. This, along with the claim of evidence tampering, have left many to believe that there was a cover-up associated with the bombing. U.S. human radiation tests. Over the course of 30 years, from 1940 to 1970, the U.S. government would conduct multiple tests on how radiation affected the human body, often without the consent of those being experimented on. Some experience including injecting people with uranium, and downsiders, or people who lived near nuclear test sites, that would be exposed to the radioactive fallout. The Dirty War. The Dirty War was a period of state-sponsored terrorism that took place in between 1974 and 1983 in Argentina under the leader General Videla. The war targeted mostly left-leaning socialist groups and was responsible for the death and disappearance of over 30,000 individuals. U.S. cover-up of Japanese war crimes. After World War II, the U.S. occupied Japan, prosecuting many of the war criminals. Absent from the prosecutions were many involved in Unit 731, as the U.S. government had taken an interest to their findings and decided to use them. As a part of the deal they made, select members of Unit 731 were made immune to any prosecution. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The Fitzgerald was a Great Lakes freighter that sank on November 10, 1975, during a severe storm on Lake Superior, claiming the lives of all 29 crew members on board. Many have claimed that the weather from the storm should not have been enough to sink the tanker, suggesting sabotage or a severe structural damage not mentioned in reports. Nigerian Civil War crimes. Throughout the Nigerian Civil War, they did everything evil you could think of. There were ethnic cleansings, mass killings, a starvation policy, slavery, and pretty much everything else. And they also did not cover any of this up. This was all in the open. Tamad Shud. During 1948 in Australia, a man washed ashore a beach with no belongings or identification other than a note that read Tamad Shud, which translates to finish. Police could not find any records of a missing person and were unable to identify the mysterious man. It remains Australia's longest unsolved mystery. Some have suggested that this is a cover-up of a man who had accidentally time-traveled or stepped foot into another dimension. Hwasong murders. The Hwasong murders, I tried my best, took place over the span of 5 years from 1986 to 1991 in Hwasong, Korea. No suspect was ever caught, making it one of Korea's longest unsolved murders until the confession of Lee Chun-jae in 2019. But the police admitted they had his DNA from the crime scenes the whole time and had failed to use them properly, along with several other mishandlings of the investigation. These were kept covered up to keep public trust in the department. Lindbergh kidnapping. In 1932, a 20-month-old baby named Charles Lindbergh Jr. was kidnapped and murdered. A man named Bruno Hauptmann would be arrested and executed for the crime 4 years later, but many have called into question the accuracy of his conviction. Some have speculated that Charles Sr. actually murdered his own son and made up the story to hide his secret. The reason for killing his son was that Charles was a eugenicist and saw a defect in his child and decided to remove him from the gene pool himself, making up a lie to cover his dark secret. Child recruitment. Couldn't find one specific thing here, but this refers to a general concept yet again. A lot of wars in the modern era, soldiers have reported fighting against children on the battlefield. This comes from terrorist groups to militias in Africa, but most of them deny recruiting children. Except for ISIS, they're proud of it. Layer 6. The Abyssal Zone. Lost Mines. Jakarta. Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia, and the population has increased from 2 million to 10 million rapidly over the past few decades. Many have speculated the city is covering up the lack of safe infrastructure and suggest that the overdevelopment has resulted in the government wanting to build as rapidly as they can by bypassing safety regulations, which will result in a coming disaster. The bear contamination scandal. This could refer to a few things, but I'm 99% positive it refers to this one, because this one is bad. Throughout the 1980s, the Bayer Pharmaceutical Company knowingly sold blood clotting agents contaminated with HIV to countries in Latin America and Asia, despite pulling them from the market in the United States, resulting in the deaths of thousands after contracting AIDS. They gave people AIDS. Lebensborn program. This was Heinrich Himmler's eugenicist-based project to promote the Aryan race in Germany. Pretty straightforward. Panama Canal Zone. This refers to the fact that throughout the construction of the Panama Canal, the U.S. displaced thousands of locals, flooding their towns and destroying local geography. Both the U.S. and the government of Panama sought to cover up these aspects of the canal's construction due to the economic incentives the canal presented. This one's a little touchy, so I'll be careful here. The USS Liberty. In 1967, during the 6 Days War, the USS Liberty, while operating in international waters, was attacked by Israeli jet fighters and missile boats, killing 34 American crew members and injuring another 171. I will not go any further than that. That is what happened. That is the facts. Iran-Contra. This is an extreme summary, but in 1985, the National Security Council authorized the selling of weapons to Iran, who we had a trade embargo with at the time, in order to get their help in freeing hostages in Lebanon. The CIA then funneled money and many weapons from the sale down to anti-socialist counter-revolutionaries in Nicaragua, all illegally. The story was exposed by a Lebanese newspaper called Al Sharia, leading to the prosecution of several high-level U.S. officials. Van Gogh's death. Though we are taught that Van Gogh took himself away from life, many have theorized that he could have been killed, pointing to his neighbors, the Secretan boys. Van Gogh and these brothers were having an active dispute between their farmlands, which many believe resulted in the brothers accidentally shooting the artist in an act of rage. There is a lack of evidence from his death to support the idea that it was self-exit, but an equal lacking to suggest otherwise, thus leading to the mystery. Grozny apartments. I'm not too sure about this one, but it seems that in the Chechen Republic of Russia, the city of Grozny quote-unquote rebuilt and refurbished massive apartments in the downtown. But there is a question into if they really refurbished them or if they just kind of slapped some paint on it. Some people are saying that the structural integrity is just not there, and they just wanted to promote the city. I'm not 100% sure on this, because I couldn't find anything else about the Grozny apartments. The Srebrenica whistleblower. During the 1995 Bosnian War, Bosnian Serb army members would massacre 8,000 Muslim Bosniak men and boys around the town of Srebrenica. The Dutch UN peacekeeping force were present but failed to intervene. It was later revealed that the leader of the peacekeeping force was actually praising the massacre on a military strategic level instead of intervening. Pan Am Flight 103. In 1988, a Boeing 747 departed from London Airport en route to New York, but the plane wouldn't get far as a time bomb detonated in the cargo hull of the plane. The plane would crash, killing all of the passengers aboard, including 103 Americans. The investigation never found any suspects, and it is still a mystery to this day. The lack of evidence and effort into the investigation has suggested there may be more details that the powers that be don't want going to the public. The Naira testimony. This refers to the testimony given by a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl to the U.S. Congressional Human Rights Caucus of 1990. The testimony was largely used to push the U.S. deeper into war in the region. It was later revealed that Naira was not actually a real person. She was the daughter of the Kuwait ambassador to the U.S., and the entire testimony had been made up in order to gain public support of the invasion. Housie Power Plant Incident. Couldn't find any record of a power plant called Housie ever existing, but there was one called the Haoxi power plant in China. It was their largest power station until 2009, but the catch was that the CCP didn't design or pay for any of it. It was designed for and paid for by a company based out of Taiwan, which the CCP naturally kept a secret. Church of Scientology cover-ups. The Church of Scientology has been accused of a lot of things, from human trafficking to forced labor to child abuse. You name it, they probably did it, according to people. And they do a really good job at keeping it quiet via the devotion of their followers. I think Scientology is super great and cool. Please don't come after me, Church of Scientology. I don't think any of that's true. Tumbler Snapper. Operation Tumbler Snapper was a series of 8 nuclear bomb tests that occurred in the 1950s. The cover-up comes from the fact that they were nearby towns, and they were affected by nuclear fallout and radiation. And instead of taking accountability, the government just said, "Nuh-uh, must have been something else." Way to go, guys! DuPont chemical cover-up. This refers to the fact that the company DuPont covered up their knowledge of the use of the toxic chemical C8 in their products. They knew damn well it was poisonous, and they still used it in Teflon and nonstick pans. The chemical has caused hormonal damage to honestly most people who have ever used a Teflon or nonstick. Cast iron, gang. Use cast iron or stainless steel. Anything but that, guys. Come on, you're better than that. Karen Silkwood. Karen Silkwood was an American chemist and labor union activist who is most known for her reported concerns about corporate health practices inside nuclear facilities. Karen would die in a car crash in 1974. The FBI would close the case quickly, leaving many unanswered questions. People began to speculate on the nature of her death, believing it was a covered-up murder. Police found that her home was contaminated with toxic levels of plutonium residue from her job at the Kerr-McGee power plant. When there were attempts to reopen the case, Kerr-McGee would step in and interfere. This led to many believing that the company had intentionally killed her in order to keep the practices and regulations loose, knowingly, and that they were harming their employees. Silkwood would have gone public to the nation, which would have hindered the dirty practices of the power companies, which was also not in the interest of the U.S. government. Black sites. Black sites are the alleged secret locations where the CIA tortures their prisoners to Black sites are the alleged secret locations where CIA tortures their prisoners. No one knows exactly where the black sites are, but there have been 2 confirmed inside of Lithuania and Romania, and 1 alleged in Thailand, which Thailand denies. Pine Gap. Pine Gap is a joint Australian-US facility located in Australia. The Pine Gap facility functions as a massive surveillance station with multiple radomes protecting radar dishes. One of the base's notable capabilities is the ability to geolocate any cell phone signal to a direct pinpoint on Earth, among other things. Castro's exploding cigar. This refers to Operation Mongoose, the CIA's plot to kill the leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro. Some ways they intended to kill him were with poisoned cigars, poisoned shoes, and of course, an exploding cigar, which obviously none of these worked. But A for effort and A for creativity. Hi-Fi murders. In Ogden, Utah, 5 people were brutally tortured during a robbery, resulting in 3 deaths. The perpetrators were sentenced to death, but there was the idea that there was racial bias in the Utah criminal system toward the white criminal, as he had been sentenced to death but has been on death row for 25 years, while his black counterpart was killed very quickly. Trojan horse programs. This refers to the virus or malware practice that will be used by cyber criminals attaching some sort of computer virus to what appears to be a legitimate operating system or software. Some have speculated that many of the common downloads on computers today, like internet exploring tools, function as a sort of Trojan horse spyware for the NSA in reference to the aforementioned prison program. Which is kind of true, but not really a cover-up. Side note here, I realized I forgot to add the PRISM program. In summary, that's the program that the NSA spies on you no matter what, and you don't have any consent to not be spied on. They can just kind of download all your internet data, and you're always being watched. And Edward Snowden exposed this in 2013, and that's why he's in exile. Dreyfus Affair. I don't know if I'm missing something here, but in 1894, a French soldier named Dreyfus sold secrets to the Germans and was sentenced to prison on Devil Island. 2 years later, evidence came out that he was innocent and he was released from prison, but wasn't exonerated until 1906. The French army tried really hard to cover up the whole thing, but they couldn't, and it was really embarrassing for them. I don't really know what the big deal is of this one, but there you go. And finally, my friends, the 7th and final layer of the cover-up iceberg too far gone. Ernest Hemingway. Yes, that Ernest Hemingway is at the center of some strange ideas. Hemingway was a part of World War II-era intelligence operations for the U.S. government, but after leaving his role and becoming an author at some point, he became a point of interest for the intel communities. The directors of both the CIA and FBI had files on him due to his alleged recruitment by the KGB. Later on in his life, he became paranoid, telling his friends and family that he was being followed by FBI agents and his house had been wiretapped and he was under constant surveillance. Leading up to his death, he would make ambiguous and strange phone calls to many of his close family and loved ones as an alleged goodbye. The circumstances of his death are strange, and the story of him committing self-unaliving don't really match up, but many believe this is a cover-up, that the government actually did the deed themselves, and killing a major author really wouldn't fly. So in other words, Ernest Hemingway was gang-stalked. British military bubonic plague. This refers to the bubonic plague outbreak in British-controlled Bombay, India in 1897. The disease most likely came on a British-controlled ship to the port city and spread like wildfire, killing 20,000 people. The British military took control of the city as fast as they could in order to stop further spread of the disease, leading to local and national political strife between India and the colonial government. Some have suggested that this was the British using an early version of biowarfare and testing it on the Indian population, but there's really no evidence for any of that. U.S. biowarfare tests. Kind of mentioned this one before, but between 1949 and 1969, and knowing the U.S. government probably longer, they conducted a lot of mass biowarfare tests on U.S. cities and U.S. territories to see the effectiveness of the cities and state response to dealing with it. Like I mentioned before, they dropped all those bacteria over San Francisco, and, now I look at chemtrails and I go, maybe it's not weather control. Maybe it's, bacteria? Ukraine famine. Otherwise known as Holodomor, this was a man-made famine caused by the rule of Joseph Stalin from 1932 to 1933. The famine resulted in the deaths of nearly 4 million people, killing 13% of Ukraine's entire population. Church Rock uranium spill. In 1979, a dam at the United Nuclear Corporation uranium mill in Church Rock, New Mexico was breached. The dam allowed 95 million gallons of radioactive waste into the Puerco River, the largest single release of radioactivity in U.S. history. As a result, the nearby Navajo Nation were exposed to massive levels of radiation. The EPA was slow to respond and failed to help in an adequate way. There was no suppression of this, and there really wasn't a cover-up. They just said, yeah, we did it. David Kelly. Dr. David Kelly was a British scientist and authority on biowarfare. He was formerly employed by the Ministry of Defense and UN as well as a weapons inspector in Iraq. He famously had an off-the-record conversation with a BBC journalist in which he doubted the claims of WMDs in Iraq as an eyewitness. He was then heavily questioned and found dead 2 days later by Self-Exit Game, but many believe that he was actually killed, as his testimony would have exposed the WMD lie and unvalidated the invasion of Iraq. Police killings of themselves. Police deaths could refer to a few things. The first is the idea that people will try to reach for officers' weapons in order to have them kill them as a form of self-unalive, or that police have some of the highest self-unalive rates of any profession in the U.S., and this is not very discussed publicly. Or the circumstances of police being involved in seeing something above their pay grade in a larger investigation and then turning up dead sometimes later. You choose. Gay frogs. They're turning the fucking frogs gay! This is the idea popularized by Alex Jones that the government is putting atrazine, a chemical that has been shown to chemically castrate frogs, in the water supply, which has been causing the forced feminization of men in the U.S. At first, this was laughed at as a conspiracy, but as time went on, more evidence mounted that though this was stated in a crude way, the water was in fact turning the frogs gay. The Finders. The Finders are a alternative lifestyle group / cult that lived off the grid and were founded by an ex-Air Force major. The group gained notable attention in 2006 when 2 members were arrested while taking care of several young children, none of which were their own. What was strange was that there was no further investigation into the group. This, coupled with their military ties and strange name, have led some to believe that they are a group involved in the trafficking of children that the U.S. government does secretly, and that the arrests were covered up not to bring the group into public attention. Action T4. Action T4 was part of the eugenics plan by the Germans in World War II. What Action T4 did was the involuntary euthanasia of 300,000 people with physical or mental disabilities, thus removing them from the gene pool. Landmine killings. Okay, so again, this is a bit broad, but I don't think this refers to one circumstance. Rather, the concept of people getting killed by old landmines from old wars and the government having to kind of cover this up. It's estimated that 2,000 people a year are injured or killed by old landmines. But the problem is, it's like, okay, I stepped on this landmine from war 80 years ago. It's technically that country that blew me up, but the government doesn't really want to be like, hey, you, especially when it's an invading force like the U.S. or Russia, and the smaller country like Afghanistan kind of has to be like, okay, let's just not start a conflict here. But that's it, in summary, what I think. The Franklin Scandal. In 1988, in Omaha, Nebraska, allegations arose when multiple prominent Nebraska political figures and businessmen were accused in the involvement of a child trafficking ring. The allegations created massive public unrest until 1990, when a grand jury deemed it to be a hoax. Many believe this was a cover-up by the state and federal government, as the investigation files were never made public, and there was less evidence of it being a hoax than it being real. The allegations of the government being involved in these activities has continued to grow, with more and more mounting evidence being revealed each year. Emeryville Shell Mound. In 1924, a massive archaeological site was destroyed in order to make a pigment factory. The builders of the factory were aware that they were destroying it, but chose to continue anyways. This one could have ended a lot worse. Dugway sheep killing. Yes, this one's a little bit weird. In 1968, the U.S. Army was testing nerve gas near the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. They accidentally leaked a potent nerve gas into the surrounding area, resulting in the death of pretty much everything, including 4,372 sheep, a very specific number, in the surrounding area. Luckily, there were no people around, allegedly, and at first the Army denied it. They said they had nothing to do with it. But as mounting pressure built, they finally said, yeah, we accidentally killed all them sheep. Our bad. Alfred Reddle.
Alfred Redl was the head of the Austro-Hungarian army's intelligence as well as a well-respected figure throughout World War I. But it was revealed that he was a spy for the Russian Empire, resulting in Redl ending his own life. People have wondered why a high-ranking, respected official would be treasonous to a nation he had no relation to. But some have pointed out that the Russian Empire may have been using blackmail on him, and they had proof of Redl being a homosexual. When caught as a spy for the Russians, he would have rather eliminated himself than go to the enemies or have his name be disgraced. This one is insane for two reasons. Peru sterilizations. Then President of Peru, President Fujimori, that's the first part. They had a Japanese guy as a leader. Didn't see that coming. Fujimori had a program called the Coercive Family Planning Program. And during the program's existence, the Peruvian government would forcibly surgically sterilize 200,000 women with low socioeconomic statuses. The Fujimori party still claims that they were all done with consent, but all those women beg to differ. The Chappaquiddick incident. In 1969, Ted Kennedy and his passenger, Mary Jo Kopechne, drove off a bridge in Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts. Kennedy would survive, but his passenger wouldn't. And it took Kennedy until the next day to report the event, leading many to believe that there was nefarious intent and that Mary Jo may have been one of his mistresses that he wanted dead. The apartheid era, not really a cover-up, but between 1948 and 1994, the National Party-led South African government would enforce a system of racial segregation and discriminations called apartheid to keep the white minority away from the black majority. Denver Airport. Okay, so there's a lot to this one, and it gets weirder as it goes along. So to start, the Denver airport was built kind of for no reason in particular. Denver had an airport that was fully functional, but it was smaller. But they chose to build a new one since the city's population importance was growing. The new airport is extremely out of the way from the city. I used to live in Denver, and it's like 45 minutes away from where they built it, and it's literally in the middle of nowhere. They had to build a whole new road, a whole new highway, and a whole new train system to get over there. And allegedly at the time, the mayor of Denver's brother owned the land, and the contract for it was huge. The second thing was that the airport went $2 billion over budget and received this massive sum of money from an anonymous source. Okay, some whistleblowers have come out stating that there's a deep underground military base, or a DUM for short, where they house reptilian hybrids, or a nuclear bunker for a nuclear Armageddon since it's in the dead middle of the country. Some have reported that during the construction of the airport, they witnessed these reptilian creatures and were even attacked by them. The Tunguska event. In 1908, a massive explosion occurred in remote Siberia, Russia, flattening out 2,100 square kilometers of land. There's never been a solid finding into what caused this event, but it's widely accepted that it was some sort of meteor. Or aliens. The WOW signal. In 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio University picked up a massive signal. Nothing like it in astrobiology had ever occurred and remains an anomaly in the field to this day. Scientists have claimed it was the result of a hypermagnetized star flare, and not from aliens. But because they specifically pointed and said not aliens, that has made schizos like me think aliens. Celebrity self-unaliving. Throughout the modern era of Hollywood, there has been a series of celebrities that most would never assume to unalive themselves or have any sort of drug problem. But yet they do. Some believe that they truly are doing it, but others believe that they are not doing it and instead are being killed since they refuse to join the evil cabal that runs Hollywood and furthermore the world, in brief summary. Monsanto. Monsanto is an agriculture company that basically controls the crops across the U.S. They've been involved in a lot of cover-ups, like knowing of the harmful cancer-causing chemicals in their product Roundup, but still pushing it like it's candy. Or the fact they created a hyper-aggressive monocrop agriculture industry through lobbying. Everything wrong with the food industry is their fault. The Borgia family. The Borgia family, or Borgia family, I don't know how to pronounce it, was a powerful political force during the Renaissance era in Italy. They went as far as to have one of their own become the Pope, did political murder, bought off politicians, and controlled much of Italy illegitimately. Some have speculated that their power went underground and that their bloodline still controls much of the world to this day. The Man in the Iron Mask. This was a real French prisoner held in jails for over 30 years until 1703. His face was concealed behind a locked iron mask. A movie by the same name would claim it would be Louis XIV's twin brother who he imprisoned so that he couldn't take the throne. In reality, the identity was never discovered and is believed to be Ercole Mattioli, an Italian count who I just butchered his name and was abducted after trying to double-cross the king. Japanese internment camps. During World War II, in fear of domestic attacks from Japanese nationalists, the U.S. put all of the Japanese people in the U.S. into long-term internment camps against their will. The camps were not reported and largely covered up in most of the U.S. until the war concluded. Penn State cover-up. In the March of 2011, it would be reported that Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky was a part of a child trafficking network. He had over 52 counts of child molesting, as well as higher-ups at Penn State would interfere with the investigation, failing to report known evidence of child abuse from Sandusky. As time went on and more info was revealed, that showed that the staff of Penn State was aware of the ongoing abuses and instead chose to cover it up. Hollywood cover-ups. This refers to the theory that many of the Hollywood elite are involved in extreme trafficking networks and child SAers. There is an alleged culture at large within the world of entertainment that has been covered up for many years. With recent arrests such as Epstein and P. Diddy, this theory has gained much more public traction and momentum, as it looks more and more likely that there has been a cover-up for all types of crimes the whole time. Jimmy Savile. Much in line with the previous entry, Jimmy Savile was a British entertainer who died in 2011. The following year, it would surface that he SA'd hundreds of people, including children, over the course of his career. Those who worked around him were in full knowledge of what was going on, but covered up his actions to keep his image acceptable and favored by the public. Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank, otherwise known as the Institute for Works of Religion, has a unique status as a sovereign entity within the Vatican City, which has allegedly allowed for extreme money laundering and embezzlement as one of the world's premier offshore accounts, with many of the world's premier criminal organizations allegedly holding accounts with the bank and washing their money through it. And finally, the Phobal disaster. The Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant would have an extreme gas leak. 40 metric tons of gas called MIC, which is extremely toxic, escaped the compound, killing nearly 4,000 and injuring 500,000. The Indian government had an alleged cover-up due to their extreme lack of transparency. Former employees of the company and documents revealed major operation flaws, design flaws, maintenance failures, lack of training, and extreme cost-cutting measures that led to the disaster. And that, my friends, is the very end of the iceberg. This was a lot of fun to make. I've never done so much research into so many topics before in my life. This was also my first time attempting this form of long form content. So if you're still here, please consider subscribing or liking this video or something, because I really put a lot of work into it. Either way, thank you for watching, and bye-bye!